All right, so I've read a lot of books this year. Yeah, I'm reading my 100th book at the moment. I'm doing all my wrap up videos where I've done my top five authors, my top five fantasy discoveries. I'm going to be doing my top 10 books of the year. But whilst going through and looking at all of my reads this year, I wanted to cover the books that were overhyped, the books that were sold to me inappropriately, the books where I was told I was going to get this and I was delivered something differently. I wanted to highlight these books, not because I wanted to talk down upon them, but I wanted to talk about why they didn't work for me and how you might want to think about these books differently if you're going into them new. Having expectations that are too high for a book can really ruin your experience for a series. If you are going into a book expecting it to be a 6 out of 5 and it to blow you away, there are very few books that can deliver on that when you're expecting it. And it can take away from a book when you're reading it and you're like, I just don't see it. I don't see why this is supposed to be perfect. It doesn't feel like a perfect book. But if you were to have gone into that book only knowing just like, all right, this is the general guideline of the plot, you might have a much better time because you're not comparing it to some thought of the book that you might have had. So I wanted to go through these series that didn't work for me because the hype was misappropriate and I was not getting what I thought I was. So this is less so an overhyped, but this is a poorly sold. Not sold by the company, of course I bought the books. They did a great job of that. But sold to me by other recommenders and reviewers and such, where I feel like I got something different, where my expectations were mismanaged. So I want to help clear up why these books weren't hits for me and why they may be better hits for you, because you can go in with better expectations for the reads. And then also keeping this on a more positive note, we don't want to all stick with the books that didn't rate too highly this year, or books I rated highly but not as highly as I thought I would. I wanted to go over some books that I just think are criminally underrated and need to be brought into your attention a bit more. Now, some of these are books that I've already made videos about. A few of these ones I've mentioned in recent videos where I've done like 3 series recommendations. I've done 3 of those videos now over the year, and each of those videos includes some of the ones I wanted to hype up a bit more. So we won't spend too much time going into what those series are about, just about why I think they're underrated and just delving further into that. So we'll start off with 3 books in the overrated category, but this is a subcategory of overrated where they are 3 really good books, but I wish I had different expectations going into them. But before I tell you what those 3 are, make sure you like this video. I really appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Make sure you subscribe and let me know what are the most overrated books you've read this year and the most underrated books you've read this year. What do more people need to read and what do people need to be aware of before they go into a heavily hyped book? So the 3 books that I really liked and greatly appreciated that I wished were sold to me differently were 1, The Sword of Kaigen. Incredible book. The first half of this book is just an Asian inspired, Avatar magic system inspired action story defending the coast of a country. And then the second half of this book, and like the whole book in particular, is a deep exploration of motherhood, finding your place in the world, and relationships. Now, if I was told that going into this book, the first half of the book would play out like your average fantasy novel. You've got great characters, really good writing, a really interesting world, a really fun magic system, a great battle that takes place. It's a perfect fantasy book. And then after that, the action part of the story stops, the plot stops, and this becomes a deep character study on one of our characters, a mother, and just her delving into her reasons for being a mother and what society tells her. And it's a very interesting story. It's a very impactful story. So if you go into Sword of Kaigen knowing this, that it's not a traditional novel, you're not just getting your regular fantasy story. You're getting that in the first 50%. The next 50% is just a slow character study. You forget about the plot threads. You forget about the political intrigue that's been building. You forget about this big brewing war that's been going on. No, that part of the story is done. You are focused on the character and just delving into her relationship with her kids. It's a very good story. I just wish I'd known that going in. That's my only critique for the Sword of Kaigen. Just make sure you manage your expectations with it. Fantastic read, super interesting world. I do rate it. I just didn't have the best experience with it because the whole plot was abandoned halfway through, and I just wasn't aware that the plot was no longer important. It was just a character study. So I didn't fully enjoy it as much as I could have had I known that. Now, the next two in this subcategory are books that are really good, but they're sold as being the best book you'll ever read almost. So the first one is The Will of the Many by James Islington, the first book in his Hierarchy trilogy. I just talked about this one in my top 5 discoveries of 2024 video, so I won't delve too far into the plot. It's kind of described as Red Rising meets fantasy, if you just want a general idea of the plot. But new society slash religion that revolves around the magic of this world has just taken over every single country. We're following a prince from the most recent country to just get conquered, and who has just survived, and he's just trying to look after himself at the moment, stay out of sight, ends up in an academy, gets brought up in the academy, and then finds himself in between the war, in between the political dynamics between the religious side of this society and the military side of this society. The religious side wants more power now that they've conquered the whole world, basically. They don't think the military needs as much power. The military doesn't want to give up power. They're going at it. He's in between them. There's also people trying to bring down this whole society from within. There's a bit of a rebellion going on. He's just wound up in all of it. Fantastic story, fantastic plot, incredible writing, incredible world building, decent characters. Just expect a really fun fantasy read and you'll have a great time. Don't expect it to change your life. I had a fantastic time with this. Don't get me wrong. I thought this was executed at a high level in every major category except for character motivations. I thought our main character was telling us he wants to do one thing, he's driven to do one thing, his one goal is to do this, and then he goes and does something that just doesn't line up with that. Now, you can look at that as our main character lying to us and he actually wants to go and do that thing, and this doesn't mean as much to him as he wants to think. And I accept that. That's fine with me. I didn't have that same experience as you did, and that's more than acceptable. We all read things in our own ways, but for compelling writing, good pacing, good plot, a good single POV fantasy story, definitely check it out. Like, you are not going to be able to go wrong with The Will of the Many. That it was just an overrated book for me because a lot of people talk about this as being their best read of the year, and it's not going to be on my top 10 list. If that's a little bit of a spoiler for you guys, I wouldn't put it at that tier because of my issues with the character motivations, but it's still a fantastic read. Now, the last one I had in this subcategory is Jade City by Fonda Lee. And I talked about this in my 3 series to break the slump video, and let me tell you, I am happy I put it there because I'm reading Jade War now, and it is breaking me out of a slump at the moment. My reading was dropping off in December, picked up Jade War, reading has gone back up. This is a fantastic series. It's just sold as being a 6 out of 5 read. It is told as being just one of the best fantasy series ever written. Guys, if you're saying that, just calm down. We are talking about epic fantasy. This is a big genre with some incredible writers. Fonda Lee is an incredible writer. She does good characters. She's got a good world. She's got a good plot. She's got a really fresh story that I am absolutely addicted to. But you can't tell me she can do world building or writing like Brian Lee Durfee or Janny Wirtz or Jay Kristoff. Like, come on. Dial things back. Her writing is really fun, but it's on like the same level as Hunger Games. It's a very simple, plain prose. It's giving you what you need to be able to picture the story, but no more. We're not getting lines of dialogue and writing that leave you thinking. Actually, her dialogue is better than her writing. Her writing is very plain. I'll just say that as most. It doesn't give you the depth that you would want from a fantasy that for me would be my favorite of all time. I love authors that can really get you thinking with their writing and not just give you just the exact simplest form of words you could use for a sentence and not leave you with much of a just lasting impression of the words because it just felt very basically written. And that doesn't mean to be an insult. Like, Brandon Sanderson and John Gwynne are 2 authors I very much enjoy reading, and they write in a very similar style. It's not a bad thing. It's just you need to manage your expectations with what you're getting from the book. I'm in the middle of Jade War right now, and I'm having an absolutely fantastic time because I went into this. I knew what I was getting. I knew I was getting a story that felt YA in depth. We didn't get super deep characters. We get some really good characters. Don't get me wrong. It's really good characters. It's a really good world. It's not a great world. It's not great characters. It's not a great story. It's all really good, but none of it's on that elite tier. And then just the writing is a bit plain for me. Knowing that, I can just go into this, binge it, fly through it, have a really fun time. I just wish I'd known that going into Jade City and hadn't expected a masterpiece. So now I know it, I'm having a much better time with the series. So just make sure you sell the series appropriately. But now let's go into some underhyped books. Let's give something some praise. Now I've got Nevernight here because I don't own the Illuminae Files by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, but I have Nevernight. This is a fantastic series, by the way. I wouldn't call it underrated. This is not going to be for everyone. I have videos on it, but the Illuminae Files, they are going to be for a lot of people. They are just a really fun reading experience. So if you're familiar with like Dracula, a book that's written in like the format of different documents and files all scraped together, that's the same thing for the Illuminae Files. It's hacked documents from a collection of spaceships that tell an incredible story with great characters, really good world building, really fun humor. If you know Jay Kristoff, you can feel his humor in there. It's a little bit more immature because it's that YA vibe. The character's a little bit more immature than his other series because it's that YA vibe. But everything else is done really well. I had zero complaints about this book. The audiobook is done with a full cast because of the format of the storytelling. Super interesting. I did a full dive into this in my 3 series to break a reading slump, along with my Jade City analysis. This is following a Union research ship in deep space as they run to a mining colony to save them from the attack of a corporation, and they are fleeing. They've got something wrong with one of their ships. They've got something wrong with one of their AIs. There's some sort of disease going on whilst they are getting pursued through space by this enemy corporation. And these hacked documents, these research folders, these private messages, these chat rooms, these fighter pilot communications, this AI thought logs, all these things just are put together in such a compelling way. It's such an interesting story. The storytelling format elevates the story. It doesn't detract from it. It doesn't detract from the character, the world building, the plot. All well done. Illuminae Files should be your next thing to break a reading slump if you want something that's fresh and different and don't mind just a little bit of an immature YA vibe. That was my only critique for the whole series. Then going back to overhyped, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This is one that just didn't work for me, and I can see why it worked for a lot of people. So I'm not going to say it's overrated for everyone. It's just overrated for me. I didn't like this forced proximity romance. It was just uncomfortable to be in. I didn't like how this turned into a steamy romance between them. Like, not a steamy romance, it's Brandon Sanderson. Of course, there's no spice, but I didn't like how just a forced proximity. I don't like a forced proximity romance in general, basically. Like, I'm not an ACOTAR guy. Then just the world building was just a bit too much for me. Like, Brandon does a very anime inspired world building for this one, and it's a very full on world building where there's just a lot to it with like his hard magics and his sciences. I get a bit burnt out with Brandon's hard magics. I just want to enjoy the magic of the story. I don't need a science project to go along with it as well. And just how he switched between the night and the day and the two different worlds that these characters are going between. It wasn't for me. It wasn't a story I was interested in. I wasn't a fan of the characters. I wasn't a fan of the world. And outside of Hoyd, there was nothing in there for me. So I didn't enjoy this story, but I know a lot of people did. So you should probably check this one out and get your own thoughts first. This isn't a book I would say to avoid because of my experience. I would say this was just my experience, and a lot of people would actually love this one. I know a lot of people that love this one, so of course you should probably go and read it. I don't think I've seen a single critique for it online, which is why I think it's overhyped, because I don't think it's any good. But in saying that, I have my own taste, and I think you guys are probably going to love it. And I'm very happy that so many people enjoyed it, because it's a decently well written because it's a decently well written book. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't the sort of thing I like to read about. But the sort of thing I do love to read about: battles, fights, actions. Another slump breaking read that I included in my most recent fantasy recommendations video, and that's the Last War trilogy by Mike Shackle. It's incredibly dark fantasy with a lot of John Gwynne vibes, in the terms that across this trilogy we get to some incredible character arcs. Now, all the characters in this series, because of how dark it is, are incredibly jaded, so none of them are likable, and none of them are characters you're going to be cheering for exactly. But you do get some pretty cool anti-heroes, get some very cool journeys of just how war can just mess people up and just change people's perceptions in such a way that they go from one messed up view to just another messed up view, do complete 180s on who they are as people. I won't talk too much on this one because I've already done that video on it a few days ago, but I'll just say, when you do want something action heavy that looks deeply into themes of war, being under enemy occupation, and just how really messed up things can really mess you up, you should check out the Last War trilogy. I got a little burnt out by the last book with just action fatigue. I thought there was too much action, but I should have known that going in. I shouldn't have read it when I wasn't in the mood for an action heavy book. So again, manage your expectations. Don't overrate this book. It's not going to be life-changing, but it's pretty good. Then actually, sticking with underrated books that more people should be checking out, the Five Warrior Angels trilogy by Brian Lee Durfee, kind of, again, along a similar lines to the Last War trilogy, but in different, but also very different. Whereas the Last War's a bit more simple in the way it's written. It's just that more plain prose like John Gwynne, but still not plain. It still has good lines that just get you thinking and really stick with you. Some really well thought out dialogue. Like, it's a very well done book. But you talk about beautiful writing like a Tad Williams or Robin Hobb or George R. R. Martin. Brian Lee Durfee is one of those writers that can just write beautiful lines. He can get really descriptive of his prose. He can build an incredible world, a really dark, really intriguing world where he takes our classic world building elements but twists them just a little bit, makes them a bit darker, makes them a bit more messed up, so they feel completely fresh. The Five Warrior Angels trilogy follows the same plot line as The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, but with all dark, jaded characters that are horrible people that you are not cheering for. You are almost cheering for the bad guys because you at least know they have some sort of goal and purpose. Our heroes here are just despicable. I was not a fan of our heroes, which was a negative thing about the first book, where I rated it down. And then getting into the second and third book, I absolutely ripped through this series, loved it. Book 2 was one of my favorite reads of the year. It may even make my top 10 books of the year list. I haven't put that together yet. But if you're looking for a big, sprawling, epic fantasy that is somehow completed in 3 books, I don't know how. These books are massive. I guess that's how he was able to do it. Huge battles, really good writing, really good world, well thought out plot. You should check out the Five Warrior Angels trilogy by Brian Lee Durfee. He has a channel here on YouTube. It's fantastic. You should be watching that if you aren't already. I did talk about this earlier in the year in another 3 dark fantasy recommendations video. Now, coming back to the overrated side, I've got to go with the banned books by Nicholas Eames, and particularly just Kings of the Wyld. There's no chance I was picking up Bloody Rose after I read Kings of the Wyld, because I was so bored. This book is just so well loved. I thought I was going to have a great time with it. I read it with you guys in our book club, and I just read it all in one day because I just wanted to get it over and done with. There was zero stakes in this book. At no point did I feel that any of our characters were in any real danger. I knew they were going to complete the mission, and it's just a group of invincible characters getting the band back together, like in that heist sort of theme, going through and just completing the image art was just, I didn't get anything from reading this. The humor in this is just the sort of humor that a bunch of teenagers could write, just sitting around eating a bunch of Cheetos and rock stars. Just, yeah, I got nothing from it. I wish I could say something redeeming about it. If you want a nice light easy read, you might like it. I want to say something nice. I just don't think I can, guys. I'm sorry. That was the only book I'll actually not be nice about. The next one I want to talk about and actually hype up is The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless, a historical fantasy set in late 10th, early 11th century Ireland, following a war between two historical magical races that have been at war for centuries. And our main characters spend a lot of time around the kings of Ireland at that time. And there was quite a few. Ireland was broken up into a lot of separate kingdoms. There was both Vikings and Irish there. Then there's a lot of pivotal fights and wars going on between the Vikings and the Irish at that time, both uniting Ireland and fighting back against Vikings. So the setting was super interesting, but the character work in this series was elite. I had such a great time with the characters. There's one just evil, evil woman in this book, and I adored her. She was so well done. There was one sweet, lovely lady, and she was incredible. I could rave about the characters in this forever. The writing, very well done. It felt really fresh. It felt like I was reading The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell, but with magic. So if you want some historical fantasy, or just some fantasy, or some low fantasy kind of historical sort of fiction, this is a series you really should check out. I believe I have talked about this on the channel quite a bit too. So we'll move on from that one now and go back to our last overhyped book. Well, we have gone through these quickly. I got halfway through this next book and I was ready to put it down. I didn't feel investment in the character. I wasn't really that interested in the story. And the humor just was not working for me. But my friend told me this is her favorite book. It's an incredible book. So I finished it. I really should have put it down. And that book is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Guy in space, waking up, getting his memories back, realizing he by himself has to save the human race by stopping space weeds. Guys, Project Hail Mary is just a guy doing math. He wakes up and he's like, all right, I'm going to do some math and figure out where I'm going and how fast I'm moving. He's just doing math. He's like, and he's just showing you his math. Like it's like just reading a textbook. Jenny goes to the store and buys 45 watermelons. She spends $7 per watermelon. How many dollars did she spend on watermelons? I did not have fun with Project Hail Mary. Again, like Kings of the Wyld, the humor, not that great. I didn't think it was that high level humor. I want jokes that I can't write myself. I love Jay Kristoff's humor because he writes humor that is just beyond me. It's not the jokes that I can write myself. It's the jokes that I want to be able to write. But in Project Hail Mary, it's the jokes that come to my mind very quickly. I can do that joke already. I want you to push my brain a little bit. I didn't get that from Project Hail Mary. I just got a guy doing math and just another math problem and another math problem. And yes, I did this on the audiobook. Yes, the audiobook is well done. It doesn't make the book any better for me. Now, I know a lot of people love this book, and I'm so happy that a lot of people love this book. I don't want people not enjoying their reads. I'm happy that people love this book and get a great time reading it, but I will not be going near any of Andy Weir's books. And here again, for me, this was just way too overhyped. One of my best mates was telling me how much he loves this book, and because he knows I do reviews, he wanted to ask me if I'd read it and had my thoughts on it. I just had to try and keep my lips zipped because I understand why people like this. Like, he's a funny guy and people relate to him, but I didn't have a fun time with it. So I thought Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir was quite overrated. But I want to finish off on a positive note because I don't like ripping books apart. Well, I do. It's fun, but I don't like doing it on the internet as much as I do just like doing it with friends. It's fun to like rip on a book. Like, guys, come on, it's fun to just bond over a mutual dislike for something. Like, isn't that just the best way of bonding? But let's finish on a high note and talk about an underrated book, something that just blew me away this year, and I think would blow away a lot of people, that people need to focus more on. And that is Janie Wirtz. Now, I don't have the books here with me, but her Wars of Light and Shadow series. I read The Curse of the Mistwraith, the first book, twice this year, and both times I was just thinking, how is this series not bigger? Why have more people not read this? Now, I talked a bit about this in my top 5 authors I discovered this year, because Janie Wirtz was number 1 on that list, because her writing is elite. Her writing is Robin Hobb meets Stephen Erickson. It's the perfect blend of those two. And her series, The Wars of the Light and Shadow, is the perfect series of Realm with the Yodelings, Malazan, and The Wheel of Time. The writing is just deep. She's not an author that will use 5 words to say 5 words, and she's not an author that will use 50 words to say 10 words. She'll use 10 words to say 50. So she'll use a little bit more words than she needs to get the exact action of the story across, but it's set in a way where she'll give you imagery or something that says a lot more than her actual words say, but she'll use some pretty big language that you have to think about, take your time with, but you'll get so much more than is on the page with her writing, with how deep and philosophical it is, how poetic and pretty her writing is. It's very lovely. It flows very nice as you read, and it just says so much. You get so much of a rich experience just reading a page of Janie Wirtz writing. And the series is such a big, massive epic that if you are a fan of epic fantasy, if you like The Wheel of Time but want something with a bit more depth, a bit more direction because it's fewer characters just focused in on, you need to check out The Wars of Light and Shadow and The Curse of the Mistwraith. You are missing out. Also, if you do want to get started on The Wars of Light and Shadow by Janie Wirtz, in January, our book club on Fable, link down description, completely free, not a sponsorship or anything, we just talk about books. We're doing The Gallant, the prequel novella for her Wars of Light and Shadow series. In January, check it out, it's a 120-page ebook, you can get it off her website. Get started, check out her works. I'll be reading it with you. It's going to be a blast. So if you are a big fan of classic fantasy, you have to check this out. It is a bit denser. That's why it kind of caters more to Malazan fans. But if you do love The Realm of the Yodelings and want something that just turns that up in the terms of plot, world building, and depth of writing, you have to check out this series. Guys, I hope I didn't come across too negative today. Now, my bloodshot eye may have made me just look like an absolute demon just ripping apart your favorite books. And I'm okay with that. I'm seriously okay with that. I would love it if that's how this came across. It's probably just coming across as some guy just sitting in his lounge room being a cranky, shrewd ass. And I'm also okay with that because that's kind of true too. All I'm saying, guys, is thank you for spending time with me. Have a fantastic day. And if you haven't already, like the video.